A couple of weeks ago, I took you all back on a ride throughout NBA history to see what the NBA looked like the last time LeBron James wasn't in the NBA Finals. We learned that although he's been just about equally as dominant through the years, a lot more has changed than one would have thought. I actually didn't even mention that Manu Ginobili sorta kinda still had hair at the time. And I was reminded of that because on that same video, somebody recommended I do this version. What did the NBA look like the last time the San Antonio Spurs missed the playoffs? The shorter version of this video is that dinosaurs and Neanderthals were still roaming the planet. And if you want to see the Spurs play next season, if they so happen to still have Kawhi Leonard, you can do so with the SeatGeek app. SeatGeek app pulls tickets from all over the web and has them in one place, so buying is really easy, and it also assures you're going to be getting the best value for your ticket. While you're doing your search, each ticket is ranked with a score from 1 to 100 that lets you know if you're getting a good deal or not for your purchase, and on top of that, it gives you a detailed view of what you would see from your seat if you were actually there. If you're interested in downloading this app, the links are going to be in both the comment section and highlighted in the description. If you're still on the fence, consider using my promo code DOM2K to get $20 off your first purchase. This is the app I used when I went to the Warriors and Magic game last season, and it made the whole process really simple, so I definitely recommend this for you. The last time the Spurs missed the NBA playoffs was much longer ago than the last time LeBron missed the finals. As a matter of fact, the NBA wasn't even thinking about LeBron back around this time because he was 13 years old. As you'd expect, Greg Popovich hadn't even had a full year as the Spurs head coach yet. The year was 1997, they were first being led by Coach Bob Hill, who was fired after 18 games, and they were being led to one of their only two 20-win seasons in franchise history in a year that was plagued by injuries for them. And of course, the NBA was totally unrecognizable compared to today. This is so ancient that MJ and the Bulls weren't even done owning the 90s yet, and they were still in the middle of working on their second three-peat. But before we get into any more specifics, check this out. 5 whole NBA franchises have either changed their name or moved altogether since the last time the Spurs missed the playoffs. The Seattle Supersonics were still a thing and hadn't made that depressing move to Oklahoma City. The Grizzlies were still in Vancouver, donning some of the most unique looking NBA jerseys ever. The Charlotte Hornets hadn't moved to New Orleans yet. The Washington Wizards were still the Bullets, and of course the Nets were in New Jersey and not Brooklyn. On top of that, the NBA consisted of only 29 franchises at the time instead of 30. The NBA had 29 teams up until 2004 when they added the Charlotte Bobcats, the team that easily holds the record for the worst gear in NBA history. The legend that would become the answer in Allen Iverson had literally just started his Hall of Fame career. He was a rookie, and during this season had made one of the most iconic plays in league history by crossing the GOAT himself. As it would turn out, nobody would be safe from that crossover for years to come, especially not Antonio McDaniels. Oh my god. But all jokes aside, rookies are a great measuring stick to show you the time that's passed. At the beginning of this season, aside from Allen Iverson, other notable rookies were Kobe, Ray Allen, Stephon Marbury, Steve Nash, Jermaine O'Neal, Antoine Walker, Marcus Camby, Derek Fisher, and Ben Wallace. Now you see, that's absolutely incredible. Literally every player that was just listed started their careers, became All-Stars, Hall of Famers, or just notable names, and finished their careers within the time that the Spurs have consecutively made the playoffs. Speaking of big names and careers, Shaquille O'Neal was a ripe 24 years old in his 5th season in the league and hadn't really accomplished anything that we would come to know him for. This was only his first season in LA after he ditched the Magic shortly after their botched finals appearance, and he was still 4 years away from winning his lone MVP award. The Lakers roster as a whole hadn't even begun to take shape of the ones that history would best remember. Shaq and Eddie Jones were the only All-Stars on the roster that season, but eventually Nick Van Exel and Kobe would join them to become the forgotten Lakers squad that featured 4-star players. So in other words, the Kobe and Shaq duo that we know now didn't even exist the last time the Spurs missed the playoffs. But what did still exist was one of the most electrifying duos in NBA history, featuring Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp. They were only a year removed from their finals loss to Jordan's Bulls, and Payton still officially had 10 years left as an NBA player. And Kemp still had 1 year left as an All-Star player before quickly morphing into a version of himself that nobody wants to remember. Now, you may remember Arvydas Sabonis from a previous video of mine. He was still only in his sophomore season the last time the Spurs missed the playoffs, and despite being only a fraction of what he could have been, he was still helping lead the Blazers to a near 50-win season alongside Rasheed Wallace, who was still a long ways off from his title with the Pistons. Down in Minnesota, KG was also in his sophomore season, and he wasn't even 21 years old yet. Garnett made his first All-Star team that year and still had only begun to scratch the surface of how good he would be by putting up a solid 17 points, 8 boards, and 2 blocks a game. But get this, KG nor Marbury were the leading scorers of that team. You may have heard a bit about this duo and what they could have been, but this was so long ago that Tom Gugliotta was the leading scorer of the Minnesota Timberwolves. So the last time San Antonio missed the playoffs, a guy whose nickname was apparently Googs was capable of being an all-star. Don't let the name fool you though, because Googs could ball. Here's a good one. While the Spurs were stringing together playoff appearances, the Clippers were entering a near decade-long playoff drought. But back in '97 when the Spurs missed it, the Clippers actually managed to get in with a mere 36 wins. So yeah, 1997 remains the only year in NBA history that the Clippers made the playoffs while the Spurs missed it. I have a feeling that record is going to hold up for a pretty good amount of time. In hindsight, we now know that the Houston Rockets championship window had closed, but they were trying something similar to a 2013 Brooklyn Nets super team with Barkley, Hakeem, and Clyde Drexler. This was the last season that either of those three players would make the All-Star team. And finally, leading the West were the Stockton and Malone-led Jazz that were on their way to losing their first of two finals to the Bulls dynasty. So basically, the last time the Spurs missed the playoffs, the Bulls had just taken down the Peyton and Kemp Sonics and were in the midst of rolling over the Stockton and Malone Jazz. But remember kids, those were just milkmen that MJ played against. So over in the East, the Miami Heat and New York Knicks rivalry was still a thing. This super famous brawl that you've probably seen on NBA TV over a million times, that took place in that year's playoffs. On one side you had big names such as Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning, and on the other was Patrick Ewing, Larry Johnson, and John Starks. The Dominique Wilkins era had been over for a few seasons in Atlanta by this time, and they were now being led by centerpiece Dikembe Mutombo. Ironically enough, this was the same year in the playoffs that Jordan added Mutombo to his collection of humiliated players. So that's two iconic moments now that happened in the same year that the Spurs last missed the playoffs, and another milkman that MJ was just able to roll over. Detroit had long left their glory days and now were apparently going to be led back there by Grant Hill, who at the time had all the promise in the world to become the next face of the NBA. Of course, injuries made that completely unrealistic, so in the same amount of time that the Spurs have been making the playoffs, Grant Hill went from a perennial all-star to a role player to a retired TV personality. That's insane. Oh, and also your favorite TNT host Kenny Smith was on his last leg in the league as well. I bring that up because he was on this Pistons roster for a short time in '97 and he played for 3 different squads that year. The Toronto Raptors leading scorer was Damon Stoudemire, as they hadn't yet drafted T-Mac or Vince Carter. So basically nobody in the universe cared about Toronto basketball outside of Toronto, a little bit like today, so that much hasn't really changed. The leading scorers in the NBA were Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, Glenn Rice, Shaquille O'Neal, and Mitch Richmond. Karl Malone would go on to win the MVP that everyone highly suspects was actually supposed to be Jordan's, and he kinda proved as much by going on to lead the Bulls past the Jazz in the finals. The win would give Jordan his second repeat, his second title after the first retirement, and his 5th NBA championship overall. That means that the mystique of 6-0 didn't even exist yet. That's how incredibly long it's been. The Spurs themselves had a pretty interesting year in 1997. They'd won nearly 60 games the season before, but due to old age and David Robinson breaking his foot, they fell to 20 wins in the very next year that we're discussing. So at least now you know the Spurs really haven't just been a flat out terrible team in even longer than the last time they missed the playoffs. They were just unfortunate in '97. Or maybe unfortunate isn't the word. With David Robinson out, they had a 37-year-old Dominique Wilkins leading them in scoring for a season that absolutely nobody remembers. Of course he wasn't going to lead them anywhere at that age, and because of their inadequacies that season, it set them up to draft Tim Duncan for the next. They won their first championship just 2 seasons later. Smart drafting down the line got them Tony Parker and Ginobili. Somehow these three turned out to be some of the most unselfish and least egotistical players in NBA history, and that's what allowed them to keep the team together for so long while they played whatever role Coach Pop assigned to them. So basically, they were able to move straight from the Twin Tower era into the Big Three era with absolutely no tanking gap in between, and right before Duncan retired, they were able to lure LaMarcus Aldridge over. That of course has given them enough fuel to make the playoffs for another long stretch, but you could go as far as to say that if Kawhi Leonard wasn't facing injuries over the last 2 seasons, it could have even resulted in another championship by now. Hell, even with all the injuries and Kawhi on his year-long hiatus, they still nearly managed to crank out another 50 wins this season, so who knows when the streak will end. Their management is top tier, and I made a video a while back about why they're so consistently great. By the time they do miss the playoffs, the storyline of that new Detroit robot game will have probably come to pass, and the league itself is going to have robots that can finally compete with LeBron. Or at least that was the original ending to this vid that I had written down a couple of weeks ago. Now Kawhi Leonard is apparently bound for LA, whether he gets traded or signs there after this summer, and for the first time in my life, the Spurs' future is in some serious jeopardy. The NBA may have looked very different the last time the Spurs missed the playoffs, but it might not look that different the next time it happens.